if the trust isn't there, the relationship isn't there.
This is very concerning. I don't personally know if I could ever trust somebody that does something like this. That's a lot of money.
He's definitely on thin ice after this.
Welcome to Just Another Money podcast with your hosts, Lauren and Nick. We're here to take real-world money situations and break them down into actionable steps you can actually use.
Whether you're budgeting, paying off debt, or saving for your future, we're all about making finances easy to understand and putting you in control of your money. Hey everyone, and welcome back to today's episode where we're talking about marriage and finances. We're going to dive into some situations from real couples who have been experiencing some money issues in their relationships. But before we get into that, we thought it'd be a good idea for Lauren and I to each share a little about how we approach personal finances in our own marriages. So Lauren, do you want to start us off by sharing how you and your husband tackle money together?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to say, I don't think there's one right way to do it. So whatever I am saying about me and my husband's situation, I don't want anyone to take it as this is the only way. But my husband and I actually keep our finances separate. We have our paychecks that go into our own checking accounts, but we do have a high yield savings account where we keep our emergency fund, the equity from the house we just sold, and, other short-term savings goals. So we do have, a joint account there, but keep our paychecks and have our own checking accounts. Now, I think for me, this really comes from my background of divorced parents and being raised by a single mom. She provided day in and day out for us. And I think that instilled in me more of a independent woman type of mentality. So personally, I feel most secure when I have full control of my own account. Should anything go south for any reason, I have my own account with my own money in it. I also like to track all of my spending, and my husband doesn't like to be as meticulous as I do with his spending. So I think having combined accounts for us would just be a little bit more stressful because he would be spending things and not tracking, and then I'd want to be tracking, and it would just be too confusing. But this really works for us because we have regular money conversations. We're aligned on our money goals. We know where the money's going. We know where our money is being budgeted for. And we always talk about things before making a big purchase. So we really don't sweat the small stuff. But if we didn't have that, conversation, communication piece there, I don't think this would work. So this is how we approach it. I know you're a little bit different, Nick. So why don't you kind of walk through what you and your wife do?
Yeah. We do things a little differently. So we are 100% combined across all of our finances. And so here's kind of how that works. So we have a single joint checking account where each of our monthly incomes gets deposited into. And then we also have a handful of joint savings accounts for our various savings goals. Now, we do each have our own credit cards, but we're authorized users on each other's credit cards. And really, we only use one of those accounts for most of our monthly purchases. And, we decided that when we got married that we were going to close out our old personal accounts at our old banks and come together and find a bank that worked for both of us and create a joint account. And so that's exactly what we did. Now, the only things that really aren't combined for us are our retirement accounts. So we each have our own individual retirement accounts and also brokerage accounts. And those mainly just logistically, you can't combine them. So that's kind of what works for us. But in terms of budgeting, like the way we go about it is that before the month starts, we'll sit down with each other. We'll kind of have like a budget meeting and we'll create our budget for the month ahead. And so in that budget, we're making sure that we're covering all of our household expenses, right? So things like utilities, housing, transportation, groceries, like all that good stuff. But we also make sure that this joint budget includes individual spending that's important to each of us. So for example, like we each have our own gym memberships inside of that budget, or if she wants to go get her hair done, or if I want to go get a haircut or whatever it is, like whatever is important to us gets put inside of that budget. Now, there's a few things that I wanted to point out that why this really works for us, because I do think that, sometimes when people hear like, oh, we're 100% combined, like we have one joint checking account, like people are like, oh, doesn't that lead to issues? And I think for us, that's actually removed a lot of the money friction that we had before. But the reason why we're able to make this work, number one is that we're fully transparent on everything that happens with our finances. So down to even just like the everyday purchase or expense that happens. And it's less about like, I need to tell my wife or she's going to get mad at me, right? And it's more about like, this is just part of our normal conversations that we have day to day. So like if at the end of the day, she's telling me like, oh yeah, I went to the store, or I had to make this purchase or whatever, like it just kind of comes up naturally. And there's never like this forced, like, like, hey, you didn't tell me about this or whatever it is, right? Like sometimes things slip our minds and there's really no issue, but also because we have this joint budget together, like we're also both contributing to it. We're both inputting our expenses, and it's not really an issue for either of us. One of the other really big things for us that we were super intentional about when we got married was that we stopped using this idea of yours and mine or his and hers. And we're intentional about changing our language to ours. So it's our money, it's our expenses, it's our goals, it's our shared vision for the future, right? There's not really like this it's his expenses or her expenses or his income or her income. This is all just ours. And that's just what's really worked well for us, especially because we really focus on having clear communication with each other. But I think the last thing, and Lauren kind of touched on this, is that we're really aligned in our values and our beliefs around money. And that ties into this shared vision that we have for what the future is and how we want to live that. And I think that's a really important part because, obviously Lauren and I have very different approaches to how we handle marriage and finances. But I do think that it's less important how you go about handling your money with your spouse. And it's more important that you have transparency and clear communication and you both develop this like shared vision for what you want your lives to look like together. And then if you decide like, hey, we're just going to have separate accounts, but we're still going to act in accordance with what we set are our goals and how we're going to spend our money. Like that's what's more important. It's less important about the day to day and how you kind of go about it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think where people get in trouble sometimes is when they have everything separate, but they don't speak about it. They don't communicate. And then in some of our situations today, they'll see there are issues with that where you don't know about the money because you guys aren't talking about it. So again, we have separate accounts, but mostly because we still know the ins and outs of each other's money and our money. So so let's jump into the first situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this one is titled, My Husband is Not Interested in Combining Finances. And this person wrote, I'm 29 and my husband is 34. We've been together for 10 years and married for 4 of those years. We've always split our finances and don't have a shared bank account. We do have a shared credit card that we both pay at the end of each month for shared expenses like groceries, buying dinner, vet bills, etc. I make about twice as much as he does and pay for a larger share of expenses. I asked him if he would be interested in combining our finances to make paying bills and budgeting easier, but he's not interested and says our arrangement is working out just fine, which it is, but I feel like if we were one family, our finances should be combined. For context, we don't have any debt, no kids, and we rent, so no mortgage, but we do plan on having kids eventually. We have a very healthy and happy marriage, so it's not a red flag at all, but just slightly disappointing. Does anyone else have the same situation? Lauren, what do you think?
Yeah, this is an interesting situation because they seem to be aligned on their expenses and their finances, and in a way where they're splitting, they're splitting some of the expenses and have a shared credit card that they both pay off at the end of the month, things like that. But it's interesting to me that he does not want to combine the finances. And that's just my independent woman kind of coming out and being like, why? Is there something that he doesn't want her to see? That's the first thing that comes to mind for me. But I guess the bigger thing is, I understand why she wants to combine, just to make things a little bit easier. So I don't know. My first thought is there's a red flag there. What's going on that he doesn't want to combine it. But also if it is working out and they've been together for 10 years, what's the reason for doing it? If it's been working out just fine, maybe that is just why he just wants to do it because they've been doing it for 10 years and it might be more, it might take a little bit more just to get everything combined. So I don't know. But I would ask the first question is like, why does she, want to combine them now after 10 years? So that's kind of my first initial thought about this.
Yeah. I mean, when I first read this, like at the end, she says that she was disappointed by his response. And so I was like, okay, well, if you're disappointed, then clearly like this isn't working out just fine. Like there's a reason to why you wanted to combine. And now, and there's a reason why he doesn't want to combine, right? I think kind of you guys both got to figure out what that is. Like, is there some lack of trust on either one of your ends or Is there like a reason why you don't want to combine things, or is it just purely because you want to make things easier, or for him, he thinks it just is easier not to combine and not go through the hassle, right? But I think at the end of the day, like if you both kind of want opposite things, right? If he wants to keep things separate, if you want to keep things combined, like the only way is to find a middle ground between that, where you're not exactly both getting exactly what you wanted, but there is parts of what you wanted that you value that you can kind of bring together. And I think for people like this, who one spouse doesn't want to combine, one spouse does, there's like this 95% joint method where you do set up a joint checking account where some of your household expenses like rent and all those other shared expenses, that's where they come out of. But you also can keep separate bank accounts for your separate money. You can still do things on your own. You're just saying, hey, like we're both going to contribute to this joint account. We're just going to pay our joint expenses. Everything else stays separate. And so I think that's, a good approach. But yeah, I mean, I feel like if one person does and one person doesn't, like you gotta come together and find some compromise to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think maybe even sitting down and like going through like, okay, why is she disappointed? And why doesn't he want to combine, and figure out the answer to both of those questions and then make a path forward from there, whether it's staying the same or your suggestion of doing the 95% with the joint checking. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, let's jump into the next situation. This is a good one. Okay. So how soon into dating do you discuss finances? Financial compatibility is a large factor in a relationship. Everyone has their own speed, but I'm curious to hear your experiences. When you first started dating someone, when did you discuss finances? How deep do you get? And how did you bring it up?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't think there's like a set date that you need to start talking about this stuff, right? Like it's not like, okay, we hit the 6-month mark. Like, how many kids do you want to have? How much debt do you have? Like, I don't think there's any like set date to it, but I do think there comes a point in everyone's relationship, and it's going to look different, and the markers for it are going to be different for each person. But where you both kind of start to realize like, hey, we're not really just dating anymore. We're kind of in this for the long run. And again, it's going to look different for everyone, but I do think there's some sense of understanding of when you start to hit that point or when you're getting close to that. And it could be after a few months or it could be after a few years, right? It's going to be different. But once you hit that point, I do think there's a few conversations that need to come up, and it's not just money, right? Like I think if marriage is something that you two see for each other in the future, or see at least in your own futures, how would your marriage work? How does your money work together? Like, do you want to have kids? Like, how would you handle things like in-laws? Or if you guys have disagreements, like how are you handling those moving forward? I do think there's a point in your relationship where you'll realize we're getting kind of serious, and there's a handful of conversations that do need to happen. But before you can continue moving forward, because if you guys aren't aligned on one of the major things like kids or finances or in-laws or things like that, that's only going to be setting yourselves up for failure in the future. And so you got to either get aligned or at least just become aware of where you stand with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, when I first read this question, I think because I'm in my mid-30s now, I think I answer this question a lot differently than I would have when I was like 18, 20, 23 even. For me, I think because finances are so important in a relationship, like we know that. We know the statistics on what divorce looks like and what the finances plays into that. For me, I'm with you. I think every relationship is a little bit different. But for someone in the mid-30s, I mean, I'm married, I'm not dating anymore. But if I did have to start over, it would be pretty quick into the relationship because of how important it is to me, and how that's something that I really value. Someone that, owns their finances and has a good plan for the future. So I'm going to talk about it sooner rather than later, just because, again, we know the statistics of what that does to relationships. So I don't think it can be, you're not going to go into your first date and be like, so how much debt do you have? But I do think that, you should bring it up when things start to feel like, okay, I could see a future with this person, or, I'm not interested in dating anybody else. So it's like that person does mean something to you. So I think that's how I would approach it. Now, how deep do you get? This is a good question. I don't know if you should just go to a dinner date and just start asking, so how much do you make? But I think there's ways to approach it, even starting with like, so what do you see for your future? Do you, I don't know, questions like, what are things you like to save for? I don't know, something that doesn't necessarily ask numbers right away, but it's their thought process on money. I think that's a good way to approach it. And to bring it up, like I said, there's lots of questions out there that you can Google, like how to bring this stuff up by asking those little questions that are not so much about the numbers, but more of how they think and how they are as a person. So, but yeah, I think that's really, up to the individual person, but you do need to bring it up, is what I'll say there.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I don't think that, you don't necessarily like, if let's say these conversations do come up, you find a way to bring it up and you start being open with each other about where you're at financially. Like, I want to be clear. Like, I don't think you need to be in similar positions financially. I think it's more important that you have similar mindsets and values around that money. Like we talked about before, right? It's not important about where you're at today, but how are you handling your money? How are you approaching money? Does one person see debt as like, oh, well, everyone has debt, it's no problem. Like I can get a car loan. I can kind of rack up my credit cards because it's not that much. And the other person's on the opposite end. Like those two people aren't going to connect when things start to get serious and when things start to get difficult, which is going to happen as you start as you are together for several years, right? Things are going to come up where it's going to test those boundaries that you have and kind of those values that you have. And if they're not shared, that's where the friction is really going to come in. So I think you're going to figure out when it starts to get serious with this person. And like Lauren said, like you got to just find out ways to kind of probe at this. Like, hey, like you said, what are some goals that you have? Like, or even just sharing what you're doing, right? Like, I know, like if I wasn't married, like I'd still be saving to buy a home and like I would share that with someone, right? Like are they sharing goals that they have with me? Like, is that stuff coming up? And if it's not, that might be a red flag as to like, it doesn't seem like this person really has goals or aspirations that they're reaching for. And any goal that you have is going to have some money component to it. So if you don't have any goals, you're probably not looking at your money at all, really. That's kind of where I'm at. But anything else to add, Lauren?
Nope. I think we covered most of it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's move on to the next one. This one is exciting. So my husband has been lying to me about our finances and we are screwed. We have $50,000 in credit card debt that I didn't know about. We owe $50,000 on a home equity loan that I didn't know about. We're 2 months behind on our mortgage and severely behind on a car payment, both that I didn't know about. I know I share the blame for this. Throughout our marriage, we've divided household responsibilities pretty evenly, but we don't split every responsibility down the middle, and finances were his job. He's just better at them, or so I thought. I quit my job when we decided to have our second child, which was 3 years ago. Then we had our youngest a year ago. I thought we were fine, and we should have been fine. I don't understand what the hell happened or why he waited so long to tell me. I trusted him completely and never would have believed this. I love him so much, and by all accounts, we had an ideal marriage. I have no idea how we ever come back for this because it will take years to pay this off. The most messed up part about this is that my dad did this exact same thing to my mom. It was awful to live through as a teenager, and it was a serious contributor to being resistant to commitment or ever relying on anyone for anything. My husband obviously knew this, and it was my number one reservation when I was quitting my job. I can't believe I was so stupid. My worst fear is coming true, and I have no idea what to do.
This is literally my worst fear, and why finances are never one person's job.
Yes.
I'm more concerned of like what that $50,000 on the credit card is, as well as a home equity loan, $100K. Like where did that money go? Like, I guess that's a big thing. Is there like a gambling problem? Something that he's spending on that she's not aware of? Like, this is very concerning. Now I know she is saying that she shouldn't have left it up to him. And I don't like that she said she was stupid. Like you try to believe your spouse. You try to, have faith in them that they're going to do the best thing for you and your children. Right. But I don't know. I know that she says that, this was not her fault, but she should have paid more attention. But I don't know. This is really hard because trust comes into this. So yeah. I guess, they have young kids. She doesn't work. So now she's in a position where they have a bunch of debt. I'm guessing she doesn't have money on the side for herself. So this is a really hard situation. I guess the biggest question for her is this something that she's going to feel that she feels like she could move past? Is she ever going to be able to trust this person again? That I don't personally know if I could ever trust somebody that does something like this. That's a lot of money. But for them, I think they need to initially sit down and figure out what's happening. Why is my husband working and we're behind on our mortgage and we have $100,000 in debt that I didn't know about? Where's this money going? That's the biggest issue. There's obviously some sort of spending that we're missing here. But then you have to say to yourself, is this somebody that I want to trust again and want to fix this with? Those are just my initial thoughts. That's very shocking. However, this is not the first time I've heard this. I've heard this quite a few times, and it's usually when one person has the job of the money and the other person has no clue what's going on. So,
Yeah. And, I think the worst part about this is he knew that this exact thing happened to her mom. He knew that she's lived through this, and like, he's causing her to live through this all over again. Right. Like, I am glad that she acknowledged that she does have some of the blame for this, but like, obviously he's the one who screwed up, right? Like, he's the one who spent the money. And if he was going to say, hey, I'm going to take the responsibility of taking care of our family financially, then you got to take care of your family financially. Like, you can't just take that responsibility and then completely drop the ball and then lie to your wife about it for years. And then, I mean, who knows how she even found out? Did she find out by accidentally opening up an app or opening up a piece of mail? Or did he come clean to her and say, hey, like I've really been struggling. I've been too scared to tell you. Like, that's one is going to really play into the trust factor moving forward. Like, if you can't trust this person anymore, or that trust is too fractured or damaged, like, there's almost no sense in tackling any of the debt or anything else. Like, if the trust isn't there, the relationship isn't there. But like, this is exactly, and you said it, this is exactly why it's never a good idea for just one person to have control over the finances, right? Like, there may be one person who does like more of the grunt work of the finances. Like, if one person doesn't really care for budgeting, but you guys have decided to budget together, cool. Like, maybe one person will be in charge of like filling out the budget. But like, you both need to be responsible for taking part in the financial decisions that happen with the family. Like, there should never have been a case where you went into massive credit card debt or you took out a home equity line of credit and your spouse didn't know about it. Now, whether that spouse actually participated in it is differently, but at least they were aware of it. At least they knew about it. And at least they were in agreement that, hey, this is the path that we're going to go forward with. But like, yeah, I think the worst part is like, you knew this is what happened and you did it all again. If you can start to build trust, and like, again, I think it's really going to come down to how did you find that out? Like, if you had to sneak around to find it out, that's really damaging to the trust, as opposed to I can at least understand if this person comes to you, like if you go to your wife and you're like, hey, like, I've been trying to do this on my own. I know you have such a hard time with the kids. Like, I wanted you to live this life and I'm just not able to give it. Like, I need your help. Like, that's a completely different case than accidentally opening up a piece of mail or seeing a number that you weren't supposed to see. And now he's spilling all the beans about like, here's where we're really at. Like, yeah, that to me is going to be the biggest part of how you move forward.
Yeah, I think so for sure. Like, was it a secret, or like, how did you find out about this? Cause that's kind of crazy. Now, this is why when I talked about like my own finances, I know they are not speaking about their finances here. They don't, talk about it. But I personally, this is why I like to have my own account, just because who knows what type of situation she's in now. Can she even get out of the marriage if she wanted to? Because they are so far in debt, and doesn't seem like she has any money because she's not working. Right. And it doesn't seem like her husband has any money because he has all this, so they're in trouble. They're 2 months behind on their mortgage, could potentially lose their home and their car. Yeah. So what would they have from there? So, but again, I like to have my own account for purposes of being independent, and for things like this. This happened to her mom. That right there for me is something that is just a non-negotiable. If that happened to me growing up, it's ingrained in me. So that's why I like to have my own account. But if you're going to have shared accounts, you need to be talking about this kind of stuff. But in this situation, they need to have a serious conversation and determine if this marriage can even continue, or can they move past this financial infidelity.
Yeah. Now, okay, let's say, like, give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he came to her and said, I messed up. I need your help. What do we do? Okay, where do you go from here? If you've decided that you can trust him again, I think the first step is you both need to start participating in the finances. Like, it can't just be one person's responsibility anymore, mainly because that person has shown you that they can't be trusted to solely handle this. Nope. You both need to start dealing with it. And I think that means setting up some ground rules for how you start to make financial decisions for this household. And that could literally be like, hey, if it's anything above a certain dollar threshold, we need to have a conversation about it. Or it could be that everything just needs to be talked about for the next year until we can kind of both regain that trust around our finances. Then we can start to maybe take away some of those restrictions or boundaries that you've set for each other, right? Yeah. I think once you can do that, like if you two are able to get on the same page, you're able to start both participating. I think you're actually probably going to end up healthier on the other side because you're both engaging in it. But this is, like you said, this is going to take a really long time to work through. And I think it is going to leave some scars like internally for a lack of trust moving forward, which is really going to be the hard part to overcome. Yeah,
for sure. And I think that, you know, a lot of times I'll recommend like people do like at least monthly meetings, you know, prepare for the month ahead. This is going to be something that has to be addressed at least once a week. I would say maybe even more than that. Mm-hmm. They're going to have to both have their eyes on the finances, and she's going to have to hold him accountable, and he's going to look to her for support. Right. I think that's the only way you move through this. It does not get fixed by keeping things the same way. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, like one thing I do want to say is like my wife and I are, like I said, 100% combined on everything, but I really wanted to be sensitive to the fact that like, I wanted her to have full control over the finances just to the extent that I had, right? Like to the same extent that I had. Like, I'm definitely the person who likes to budget more. Like I got her into budgeting, which was awesome because we've now kind of bonded over that. Like we enjoy talking about budgeting now, but like I'm definitely the nerdier person when it comes to personal finance. But I was like, cool, like we made this joint checking account. She for sure has to have her own app on her phone with her own login that she has full access to. Like we went down to the bank together, made sure that she wasn't just added to the account. Like she was a co-owner of the account. She could make decisions about the account the same as I could, right? Like we're at the same level in terms of our ability to affect our finances together. And I think if you're going to be joint, you both have to have complete control. You both have to have access to the passwords to all the different accounts. And like, for example, like my retirement accounts, she has access to her retirement accounts. I have access to, like, it's fully transparent with everything. And like, there is that level of trust where this is what works for us. But like if you're going to be combined, I do think you need that extent of transparency with each other.
Yeah, that's a really healthy way to do your finances. That's awesome.
Thanks.
All right, let's jump into the next one. I hope it's not like the last one.
Yeah, right.
All right. So this one says, should I end things with my boyfriend as he is bad with money? I'm 30, earn good money, have my own apartment, and I'm financially comfortable. My boyfriend of 6 months has been terrible with money for as long as I've known him. We earn the same salary and he still lives with his parents. In parentheses, nothing wrong with that, but he's always struggling for money. I know he has a lot of outgoings and some debt to pay, but it's starting to get me down. I know with his previous girlfriend, he used to take her out for dinner and trips away a lot, but he doesn't have the money to do that with me. I always offer to pay half for things, but he says it makes him feel uncomfortable as he feels he, as the man, should be paying for everything, which I don't agree with. I asked him why he could afford to take his ex and do things, and he said it was because he was doing illegal activities on the side to make extra cash. Now that he stopped that, he's struggling to get by on his normal wage. As a result, we've been out for dinner 4 times in 6 months, and the rest of the time we just hang out at each other's houses, which is starting to get boring. My friends are concerned that he's just with me as he sees me as a meal ticket, as financially I'm in much better situation than he is. He's trying to improve his situation, but nothing has changed since I met him, and he's already talking about babies and moving in together, which seems bizarre considering he has no savings or money behind him. He's a nice person and we get along so well. He cares about me and I like him very much, but long term, I'm not sure if it's worth it. Should I cut my losses and run?
The first thing I'll say is 6 months is really not that long. And like, if you're going to decide to be with someone forever, like if you've already seen these red flags in the first 6 months, like it's now look, I'm not saying you should break up with this person, but it's not a bad idea to just cut your losses and run. Like dating is like you are making a commitment to each other, but also you're not married. Like if this isn't the person, like if this person is too much hassle and like you feel like he really has to change to fit with how you want to live your life, like, yeah, cut your losses and find someone who's going to treat you the way you want to be treated. And I do think there is some, I don't know the right word for it, but like a little bit of resentment for like, hey, you treated your ex like this. Why aren't you treating me like this? And to only go out 4 times in the last 6 months, I will say is really like, you're underperforming there, buddy. Like 6 months is not a long time, but like, I mean, even if you were to go out, once a month, it should at least be 6 times. But like, I don't know what else you guys are doing if you've only gone out 4 times and you're only dating 6 months. But I think again, like we talked about it before, it's less about where they're at financially and more about how they deal with their finances from like a mindset and values perspective. It does not seem like this person shares the same values around money with you. Like, I don't care if I care a little bit that he's living at home and he's how old, 30, but that point aside, like if he's down financially, but he's like, hey, I'm really trying to make progress. And that's why we can't go out. We can't go out because I really want to like make progress. I want to save up this money because I have these big plans for what I want to do with you. And I want to have this big, beautiful life together. And like, that's why we're not going out. Like if there was that explanation, hey, this guy is actually probably like a green flag and maybe you should stick around with him. But like, if there's no explanation and he's just like cool, just chilling on his parents' couch, like, oh yeah, one day you and I will have babies, we'll move in together. Like it does seem like you're that free ticket that he kind of hit the lottery with. So I don't know. That's kind of my first take on it.
Yeah. The biggest thing that stood out for me was that they make the same salary and she's living on her own.
Yes.
He's living with his parents and still struggling financially. And then she says he's trying to improve his situation, but nothing has changed. So, girl, I don't think he's trying to improve his situation. I think he's telling you that and you're believing him, but nothing is changing. So, initially, like I said, this is 6 months and nothing has really changed. And he was treating his other girlfriends better. So I'm gonna just be on my way out. That's that is literally my take on this. I really can't put too much emphasis on this guy that is not trying to change his money situation. It should have been changed already if he's living at home with his parents, period.
Yeah. I mean, living at home with your parents is such a huge like benefit to your finances. Like just purely from a numbers perspective, if you can't get ahead while you're living at home, while you have very few expenses, and if the other person makes the same amount, is able to get ahead, but they do live on their own, like something is off here. Like, where is your money going? I would say though, like, if you've put in 6 months, he is probably at least worth a conversation. One conversation. I don't know how many times you've talked to him about this before. It's at least worth one last conversation to make sure that you didn't miss out on what could have been from someone who just needed that push, right? Maybe this person really could be someone great who has goals and aspirations and really works for it. Just needs that one little push, right? And I do think as a couple, whether you're married or just dating, like you are there in part to also help each other want to strive for greater things, I think. So I think he's worth one more conversation to say, hey, these are some things that I really care about. Do you care about them? If it's yes, next part of the conversation is, what are you doing to show me that you're caring about these things? Because I just don't see it. Right? Like actions 100% speak louder than words. And if your actions aren't changing, but your words are, like, it doesn't really matter at that point. Like it's kind of just empty words. So yeah, I think he's worth one last conversation, but he's definitely on thin ice after this.
Thin ice. You're a good man, because I don't know if I would have even given him that last conversation.
I mean, 6 months isn't not long in the grand scheme of things, but I think it's long enough to at least be like, okay, let me, I don't want to wait. If you waste 6 months multiple times in a row, like you've wasted years of your life. So yeah, maybe.
Okay. I'll give it to you.
Okay. Let's move on to the next one. So this one says, my husband is upset that I don't want to fully join our bank accounts. And this person wrote, am I in the wrong here? We are newly married, and up until now, my husband and I have kept our finances separate. He's mentioned wanting to join them together, and while I like the idea, I personally want to keep a smaller portion of my monthly payment in my own personal account, and the rest goes into our joint account. But when I expressed this to him, he went silent and mentioned how he expected all of her money to go into the joint account and was puzzled as to why I wouldn't want to. I mentioned, perhaps foolishly, that it was simply an insurance thing and that it would be nice to set aside money in an account that I can reach into for emergencies or personal expenses like makeup or other unnecessary expenses. He told me that wanting to do this is an extremely fear-based decision. Maybe it is. And ever since then, he's been kind of short with me since that discussion. He's had this coldness in his eyes anytime I look at him. Am I wrong for this? What would have been a better way to express how I want to combine our finances? What do you think, Lauren?
Yeah. So as you know, I agree with her. I think that she doesn't have to combine finances with her husband if she doesn't want to. I think the problem was her saying something about an insurance thing, which of course you can, like the last person, or two scenarios ago when we talked about, somebody who is now a stay-at-home mom with no money. And it would be an insurance thing for her. So yes, it can be considered that, but I think wording it that way to your husband was probably not the correct way to go. Maybe she should have said something like, just for my own security, I really just want to have an account where I can just do, have for emergencies or for my personal expenses, I think it's how you approach it. I think that she just kind of set it up that like, well, if we get a divorce someday, like I just want to have my own account. That's how it probably came across to him, even though you only said like it was an insurance thing. Because I don't think there's anything wrong with it. They still have a joint account together. They obviously are talking about their money if they have that joint account and they're putting things in for expenses, but there's nothing wrong with it other than the fact that she just approached it the wrong way. So maybe just talking about how she feels instead of just saying like, the insurance type thing. That's where my head goes because obviously I sort of align with this, but I don't label it that way for myself.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, if my wife came to me and said, hey, like, I want to start keeping some money separate, like just as like insurance, I would be like, insurance for what? Like, are you thinking of divorcing me? Like, I don't think she worded it the right way at all, but I do think her heart's probably in the right place.
Yeah.
With that said, like, he pointed out that it seems like a fear-based decision. And I do think it is, right? Like there's nothing wrong with that being a fear-based decision. There's also nothing wrong with acknowledging it. But like, I mean, we talked about it earlier. Like if he wants one thing and you want the other thing, like you got to find compromise because that's literally like what marriage is about. I wasn't sure if they've already set up a joint account or if that's just kind of the proposition that she had, but it could be just like a different, like maybe there's just a way that you can start, like a flow for how you handle your money that would satisfy the things that he wants satisfied and would satisfy the things that you want satisfied. Like maybe if your money was just deposited into the same account and then you each took your own like personal cut from it, maybe that would be enough to satisfy it, right? Like maybe he would be happy with that. You still get your own money. You can still put money to the side for emergencies, for those unnecessary expenses, like you said. And like, yes, this can be like your insurance, but definitely don't be labeling it as insurance to your husband. Like that is probably not the best way to go about it. Cause the first thing anyone's going to think of is, oh, I need insurance, is like insurance for a divorce. And like, I don't think you should plan for failure, but I do think it's okay to set it up to where you're not absolutely screwed in case that happens, right? Like, yeah, I wouldn't have worded it as insurance, but I do think there's a way you can compromise to make sure that you both get what you want out of it. Like you want your independence, and it seems like he probably just wants like transparency with all of it, right? Like that can be solved if you just figure out a flow for your finances that work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mistake there. I thought that they already had a joint account, but yeah, it looks like she suggested that she just wants to keep a smaller portion in her own and then the rest would go into a joint account, which I think is a great idea. But yeah, how she approached it, not great. So that just made him kind of question things like, oh, so that's what she thinks about us,
Yeah. Yeah. And like, before my wife and I got married, like we had a conversation about, kind of like the big ones, right? Like, let's talk about money. Let's talk about kids. Let's talk about in-laws. Like, let's talk about kind of the big 3 to 5 different things that play big roles in your life. And obviously one of those was money. And I expressed to her like, hey, like, I would like for us to join our accounts together. Like, this is why, it's important because of X, Y, and Z. And she wasn't necessarily opposed to it, but her first question was, does that mean like I won't have my own money to spend? And I was very clear, like, No, absolutely. Like you're going to have your own money to spend. The only difference is that it's just in our budget, right? And that's kind of how I outlined it earlier. Inside of our budget, we each get to put in our own individual expenses, however, whatever expenses we want. And I think the important thing is I acknowledge that if something's important to her, it is now absolutely important to me. And the same's for her. If I think something's important, she gives it importance as well. And all of that it's more than just like, hey, yeah, I think that's important as well. It's in action. Like we put it in our budget, and that's the agreement that we're making to how to spend our money for the month. We both get a vote for that. And we both decide like, what is our money going to be doing for us this month? But yeah, I think the big part of that for us is that we each still have our own money. Now, like I said, the flow of how you get to that could be differently than how mine and my wife does it. It could be more like how Lauren and her husband do it, right? Like it's more about having the same values underneath all of that.
Yep. I think that wraps it up. So let's jump into the last situation we have. Dating someone who makes half as much money as you. I'm 27, living with my girlfriend of several years, and I'm thinking about marrying her. I make double what she makes in a year. We don't pay for any expenses the other has, car notes, gym membership, student loans, etc. And on shared bills, we split it 2/3, me and 1/3 her. I find it difficult navigating shared financial situations with her because I don't want to contribute more than my 2/3, and sometimes she doesn't have the money to put towards it. Anyone else in my situation, and how do you navigate your relationship finances?
This to me is why I'm such a big proponent of finding a way to join your finances together, right? Because I do think it's worthwhile to try to remove as much of the his and hers and make as much of it as we can into ours. And I think there's, like this person said, like if this already hasn't started to build, it's going to start to build this level of resentment to where, hey, like I've contributed exactly 2/3 and you're kind of at like a quarter when you should be at a third. And like, it just starts to get really awkward when you have to talk about like, hey, you don't have enough money to put towards this. And I don't want to really put more of my own money. If this is someone who you want to marry, like one, I don't think it should be like his and hers. I think there's a way, again, it can look differently, but it is at the end of the day ours, both like legally, but also I think emotionally it should be that. And I think it's going to remove a lot of the barrier or a lot of the friction of this is my 2/3, this is her 1/3. And it can start to, I would imagine for her, it can start to feel like he really contributes more than me. Like I'm not really contributing to this relationship. And on his end, it's probably like, I wish she could contribute more. And to me, that's just messy, and it's probably not making either of you feel good about it. Right. So.
Yeah, exactly. Now I'm just wondering if maybe he feels this way because they're still just dating. That was my initial thought. Like maybe he feels this way because they're still not technically combined. Yeah. Like if you're not married yet, then maybe you don't want to be paying more for the person that you are not legally married to, So that was my first thing. Second would be, because my husband and I don't combine our finances other than our joint savings account, how I like to approach like splitting finances and like with your bills and stuff, we do like a percentage based approach. So it's never like, well, for right now we make very similar income. So it is more 50-50, but I think they need to find like a good balance and like do the percentages. We could talk about the math on that, but really it's just equal percentages of your income going towards those bills. So obviously his is going to be more than hers, but that should help a little bit with rather than just like 2/3 and a third, like actually make it equal for both of them, based on the percentage of, what bills they do share together. Because then it's, whether it's like 20% of his income and 20% of hers, but it's not like a 50-50 with someone making, let's say he makes $200,000 a year and she makes $100,000. Like that's quite a bit more money that he has and she'd be spending a lot more of her income that way. So, but yeah, I agree with you. Like once they get married, then it's like, okay, stop the getting mad because of the 2/3 thing. Like, let's just like budget together. Let's talk about money and realize that like, this is both of our money. At the end of the day, whether you keep your checking account separate or not, you're still budgeting together. You're still communicating about your finances and finding a path forward from there.
Yeah. And one thing that kind of like stuck out to me a little bit is that he said, I find it difficult navigating shared financial situations with her because I don't want to contribute more than my 2/3. I don't know. That sentence, the way he wrote it sounds a little off-putting. Like, and maybe like you said, if you're not married, like you probably shouldn't have joint expenses. Like I could see some situations where maybe if you have a child together, like whatever, right? But like, is that going to change when you get married, or are you still going to feel that same level of like, this is mine and I want to keep mine separate from yours? Because I don't think that's ever going to set up a relationship for success in any context. Like it doesn't have to just be about money. Like if these things are mine and those things are yours and you handle yours, I'll handle mine. Like that's not what marriage is about. It's about, becoming one. And again, that can look differently for different people, but like ultimately you guys have to find a way to come together on this. And if you are very like protective over what's yours, is this the person who you want to be spending the rest of your life with? Like, are you just looking at marrying this person because you've spent several years together and it feels like the next step? Or is this really like the person who you want to marry? Because I do think if this is the person who you want to marry, like for me personally, like I knew when I wanted to marry my wife, like did not matter what was mine and what was hers. Like from my perspective, like all of mine was up to grabs for her because all that matters was I wanted to marry her, right? Like that I think that was my mindset. And I find it strange to hear another mindset of like, well, this is mine. And even though I want to marry this girl, like I still see my stuff way over here, that's kind of where my head's going with it,
Yep. Same thing. And there's been times where my husband has made more than me. And there was times where I made more than him, but we always navigated it like, anything else. Like we're still going to contribute. It's still our money because we are married, whether we have an account together or not. That's how we approach it. So yeah, it's really just getting into the mindset of more of it's ours rather than just like, I don't want her to take mine,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So, before we wrap this up, one thing that we did want to share with you all was this statistic about marriage and finances that's kind of popular. I think you do kind of hear it that like 50% of marriages end in divorce. And a lot of times that does have to do with finances. And so this statistic here reads that over 40% of marriages end due to financial disagreements. Choosing who you marry is one of the most important financial decisions you will make. A mistake can cost you thousands of dollars, hours of time, and peace of mind. Your spouse can either help you build wealth or deplete it, so choose wisely. And Lauren, the question I have for you is, what would you say is maybe your top pieces of advice for either newly married couples or couples who are starting to get into that conversation of kind of the big topics that are going to define marriages, right? Like the finances, the kids and stuff. What do you think are your best pieces of advice for someone in that situation?
Yeah, the first thing would be obviously to communicate about your finances. Now, this goes back to when should you start talking about them when you're dating? And that's whenever, you're getting more serious. So having conversations around money. And like you had mentioned before, it's not always like you have to be in the same financial spot. Like the person you're marrying, if you're debt free, can't have debt, but do they want the same things that you do out of life? So I think the biggest thing is communicate about it. Make sure you're very transparent about it. Make sure that person is willing to be transparent. If they're not, that's a red flag to me. Another thing would be to be aligned on your goals. What does your future look like? What type of house do you want to live in? Do you want to go on vacations every year? What does that look like for you both? Is that aligned? So I think those are the two biggest things for me, like being aligned on your money goals and also communicating about it. Because if you can get on both of those, you really can't fail unless you stop talking about it and stop sharing those goals. So that's probably my best piece of advice for couples.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the shared vision one is such a huge part. My wife and I, we started dating fairly young. We were 18. And so one of the benefits that we had to our relationship is that we really continued to, obviously at 18, you are legally an adult, but really, you haven't become a fully formed adult yet, especially if you're going to college. So one of the benefits we had is that we continued to grow up with each other, and we experienced a lot of big life things together. And one of the things that I loved about us dating young and then going into marriage was that we really helped shape each other, right? Like she shaped me so much. I shaped her a lot. And like that, I think contributed to us being on the same page about our finances and about how we think about money. And, when we were looking to get married, like we weren't in the same spot financially. Like she still had this student loan debt because she was going and getting her master's. And like, that was all good with me, right? Like it didn't matter to me that she had this debt, even though I was debt free. It was more important to me that she had the same values of like, hey, like one of the things she told me, which I loved and I hated at the same time was I want to get married. I really want to come into this marriage debt free. And to me, like, obviously I was like, okay, like, we can put this off until you reach this goal that you have for yourself. And that wasn't, the best thing. Like, I didn't love hearing that, but at the same time, I did love it because it showed to me that like she really had the same values around money that I did. Like, she just felt guilty about coming into this marriage not feeling like she was equal or had an equal footing financially as me. And to me, that really that was really what sealed the deal, is like, okay, like this person cares so much about where they are financially because of where it's going to lead to like their future, right? Like how are they going to get ahead in the future? And that's something she really cared about. So I think having these shared values around money, like, again, doesn't matter where you're at, where you're starting at with your finances, but it matters how you're thinking about them. What's your mindset going into them? So those are kind of the most important things to me when it comes to marriage and finances. Lauren, anything else to add?
Nope. I think we covered it all. Communication and sharing a vision together.
Yeah. Those are the big ones. Well, that wraps up this episode of Just Another Money Podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, if you felt like we gave you some value, we would really, really appreciate it if you could leave a comment or leave a review and subscribe to this. And of course, if you want to share this with a friend, that is going to be the best way you can help us grow.
Yeah. And if you want to have your money questions answered on the show, you can send us an email to justanothermoneypodcast@gmail.com or our Instagrams, which are linked below. And don't forget to join us on another episode of Just Another Money Podcast.
The information, opinions, and recommendations provided on this podcast are for entertainment purposes only and do not constitute professional financial advice. Any financial decisions you make based on the content of this podcast are your responsibility. We strongly recommend consulting with a licensed financial advisor or other qualified professional before making any significant financial decisions. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge that we are not liable for any financial outcomes.